teach and be a little more laid back and try not to get too preachy. I would every once in a while, but anyway, tonight, 1 Samuel 16, verses 1 through 13. I mentioned this Sunday. I just thought it might be an appropriate thing to look at because there's a lot of applicable truths to what's going on with your church right now as far as in the process of seeking out your next pastor. And so I actually developed this message right before I retired, and I preached it at Mount Zion. I had so many people that came up to me and said, Brother Gary, I really, before you preached that message, I'd already made up my mind I would not serve on the pulpit committee under any circumstances, but said after I heard that message, I had to rethink that process, and if that's what God wants me to do, I'll do it. So there's some great truths in this passage. So beginning in verse 1 of 1 Samuel 16, and the Lord said unto Samuel, How long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thine horn with oil and go, and I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. And Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hear it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, Take a heifer with thee, and say, I am come to sacrifice to the Lord. And call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show thee what thou shalt do, and thou shalt anoint unto me him whom I name unto thee. And Samuel did that which the Lord spake, and came to Bethlehem, and the elders of the town trembled at his coming, and said, Comest thou peaceably? And he said, Peaceably I am come to sacrifice unto the Lord. Sanctify yourselves, and come with me to the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his son, and called them to the sacrifice. And it came to pass, when they were come, that he looked on Eliab, and said, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said unto Samuel, Look not on his countenance, or on his height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as a man seeth. For a man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab, and made him pass before Samuel, and he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. Then Jesse made Shammah to pass by, and he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. Again Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel. And Samuel said unto Jesse, The Lord hath not chosen these. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Are here all thy children? And he said, Thou remainest yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come thither. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look at. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil, and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. I don't think I have to tell this to the Wednesday night crowd. I'm sure you already know it. But the nation of Israel was what was called a theocracy. Theo, God. It was ruled by God. But you know this. They decided, hey, we want to be like all the other nations. We want a king. Well, there's an old saying that goes like this: when you get what you wanted, will you want what you got? And so you know that by now. Saul is he's a train wreck. I mean, and he's just at that stage where he's going to get steadily worse in what he's doing. But the number one thing that's going on with Saul, he's made enough mistakes at this point that God has literally taken his hand off his life. And that's what's going on at this time when this process happens, where we see this, what I'm going to call, is an undesirable assignment. Now, what I mean by that is that Saul is, again, he's out of God's will. he's bad, and he's going to get worse. Well, if anybody's going to know that, it's going to be the spiritual leader of the nation of Israel at this time, which was the prophet Samuel. And I'm sure that he is praying for him and praying for the nation and just on his face before God, because he knows the danger of it. Look at Proverbs 29:2, if you don't mind. Here's what Samuel would have known. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. Now, I certainly believe we have lived in a day and time in America where we understand that. I don't think things are perfect right now. I'm not saying that. I told somebody in this last election, I said, it just comes down between Ahab and Jezebel. But if everything I can see, Ahab's still a better choice. But we are seeing vast improvement from what we had there for a while. I remember, if you remember when Obama was there, and do you remember that when he painted the White House in rainbow colors, lit it up with lights, and we all were just, we knew, God, this can't be good for our nation. Do something. Well, my point is, I'm sure that's what Samuel is on his face praying. God, rescue us. God, don't turn your back on us. God, we're your people. We're your children. Do something. Well, as it happened so many times, God said, all right, we'll do something. I'm going to do it through you. See, so many times that's what happens when what we don't understand, even in our churches, sometimes when we see a desperate need or we realize there's something, God has put that on our heart. And sometimes we're the very one, well, I revealed it to you, and so it is you that, The thing is, what was God asking? To go anoint another king? You don't do that with Saul. You don't get in his way. A few chapters from now, when he's after David trying to kill him, remember he took out a contingency of priests. If he'd kill a priest later, he'll kill a prophet now. And that's what the Lord have you thought this thing through? He's got eyes and ears everywhere, and you're asking me to go anoint another king. And so many times, God puts us in those places. We sometimes say, God, here's what I want you to do. I want you to call me. I want to do something, but I want a safety net. Or I want it to be not out of my comfort zone. And it just doesn't work that way. And I believe what happens in our life so many times, church, when we get to the end of our way, we'll look back, and it would have been the time that we were probably the most fearful or out of our comfort zone, but we will look back and say that was the greatest part of our spiritual journey. Asked Daniel, what was your scariest moment? Spent the night in a den of lions, Asked Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what was your scariest moment? It was when they threw us into a fiery furnace. Asked David, what was your scariest moment? It wasn't facing Saul. It was when he walked out there as a teenager, a kid, and had to face the Philistine giant. But now let's go back and ask them later. Daniel, what was your greatest spiritual time? Oh, the night I slept with the lions. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the day that we went into the fire and literally the Son of God come and walked with us. David, what was it? Well, the day that I shut the mouth of that Philistine that was cursing God and took him out. And so it is the same thing with us. So many things that I feared and did through my ministry, I now look back and, sometimes I'd even say, Lord, why am I going through this? But you know what? Even now, as a senior pastor, do you realize how many calls I get from pastors? Hey, Brother Gary, here's what I'm going through. Can you? And if you've walked through some of that stuff. Well, at Mount Zion, we had several ladies there that got cancer and turned it into a ministry. I mean, from going through that journey, they turned around and they help so many ladies that are walking down the same road that they do. There's a saying that says this: our God never wastes pain. And that's the truth. And so Samuel is finding that out. But here's the other thing I want you to see. Someone has well said, even the best of men are still men, just men at best. That's Samuel. I mean, again, they don't come any better right now in the land of Israel than Samuel. I mean, everything we read about this guy, he's the real deal. He was a faithful prophet that stood for what's right. I mean, he'd get in the face of Saul in a heartbeat. You're a student of the Scripture. But here he's showing his true colors. God, let's talk about this. Here, do you realize what you're asking of me? Do you know what God was asking of him? To get to be a part of anointing the greatest king in the history of Israel. That's what he was asking. I'm Samuel. You are trying to resist. You're trying to resist something that it's going to be the greatest honor of your life that will go down as the day you anointed David as the king of Israel and what he would do and lead that nation in the way he did. And so here's my point tonight in this Wednesday night Bible study is be careful sometimes when we have a tendency to resist what God is asking of us because, hey, it may be a little fearful or a little scary or sometimes it doesn't make sense. There's a lot of times God asks us to do something. It just doesn't make sense. I had a friend that was at one of these evangelists. It may have been Billy Graham, one of the big rallies. And he was there with a group from his church and a pastor, and they said, everybody bow your head, close your eyes. If you're here tonight and you've never trusted Christ, raise your hand. And he said, I don't know why I felt compelled. My salvation was sure. I was the pastor. I was there. But he said, I felt compelled to raise my hand. He said, wasn't nobody looking. I'm just being obedient. He said, well, I didn't know the lady behind me was peeping. And when they said, if you raise your hand, come to the stadium floor, he said, I dropped my hand, I wasn't going. And this lady grabbed a hold of me, she said, we're going. And said, she drugged me down there. And he said, I'm thinking, what in the world am I doing here? What is my church? He said, but when we started to pray, there was a man beside me just broke and began weeping. And he said, I was able to kneel down by that man and lead him to Jesus. And he said, God did that just to put me there. That's sometimes it just don't have to make sense, for God to be a part of it. So you see that in this. Samuel, don't do that. Did you notice that what they said though? That when they found out they're coming, the people in the city were nervous? Because the prophet was coming. That tells you a lot about the spiritual state. He's coming here to get on us. He's coming here. He's going to see what we've been up to. We've been playing church, and now we're going to get caught. Wasn't even the reason he was coming, but they were scared anyway. That's still our job today. Boy, in the world that we live today, we're the salt, we're the light. One thing salt will do? It'll sting, won't it? It'll get, if you got a paper cut or some kind of cut and you get salt, and salt stings. Light, Light reveals. My wife was and sometimes that makes us uncomfortable, but it's still our job description. We're to stand for truth. We're to say, that's wrong. Don't do that. It was one of my wife's class reunions, and they had a speaker. I won't call his name. He was a former teacher there at Oxford, and a lot of times they do that to kind of speak that night. And I'm there with my wife. I'm sitting in the back, and he gets up, and the first words out of his mouth was, well, I had y'all some really good jokes tonight, but I look back there and I see Gary Ragsdale, and I decided I better not use those. Now, at first I was a little red-faced, or a little, I'm like, but then the more I thought about it, that's us. That's who we are. That's what we're called to do. That's what we're called to do. And you know what I see so many times, church, even in our own families sometimes, we have to go, hey, that ain't the way it's done. As a pastor, on more than one occasion, I would see some of my church members sitting over the table, and I'd go over there, and their kids, who maybe had just got married or something, were there, and you know what they'd be having? Alcohol. Not my church member, but she was sitting there with her kids having, I'm not doing that. My kids know better than that. You're not going to bring it in my house. I'm not going to, I stand against it. I'm not saying they don't do it, but I don't think they are. And I think some of that is just the fact that, hey, that's the way we've been taught. And so my point is, that's our job. Again, Samuel wasn't perfect in every way, but he was still enough spiritual influence to know, hey, we need to straighten up, the prophet's coming. So not only do I want you to see that it was an undesirable assignment because of the danger in all of it, but listen to this, it was an uncomfortable assessment. First of all, there is what I've called the apparent rejected. Now, if you're going to replace Saul, if Fox News or CNN or whatever had went downtown Jerusalem and said, okay, who's your next king? Oh, that is no problem, sir. Our king has a son, and they don't come no better. And you know what? They were right. Jonathan, this guy shines like a new penny. He was a friend of David. Everything that we read about Jonathan is pure, class, honesty, integrity, bravery. He was a warrior. He is the complete package. So he's the next king, right? No. Why? Because it wasn't God's king. God was the one that made that decision. Again, the Lord blessed me at Mount Zion with a tremendous staff. I can't brag enough on those guys that worked in the student ministry, my education administration, and it was just and I knew at least two of them were going to be interested in the job. And there were some people in the church that immediately just said, well, that's what they were hired for. It was not. It was not. Now, I don't mean that I would have rejected if that's who the committee had said, this is our guy. I'd have high-fived them and congratulated them, and we went on. There were some people that just assumed that. One of the things that I said to the committee when I met with them on a couple of occasions, and I said, guys, y'all got to start from scratch. Anybody of y'all that has a name right now, get rid of it. Go to zero and start from there asking God, not our name, but your name. See, that's another thing that I think happens in Baptist churches a lot, and it really can go awry quickly here. Meadowbrook, but to me, it's the simplest process in the world. Elect people that you can trust, and then simply trust the people you elect. And if churches would do that, but you know how it can get sideways and how things can happen and all that, and it can literally turn into a nightmare. There was a church not far from here. They had worked about a year, finally found a pastor. I mean, he got like a 51%. He may have got you had to get a certain percentage, and he didn't get it. And so the committee was just, we worked all this hard, and we found the guy we thought was the pastor. And so, of course, you know what happens in that. The people, they resign off the committee. And you can't hardly blame them. You know, you've asked us to do something, we did it, and then you didn't trust us when it was all said and done, and that happens a lot. But my point is just simply, as good as Jonathan is, it all comes down to one thing. He's not God's next king. David is God's next king. So not only do you see the apparent rejected, but I want you to see this, the appearance rejected. Then we start looking at these 7 sons, and you know that each one of the first one, the way they talk to Eliab, he's an impressive dude by everything, tall and handsome, and y'all done that one time. That's how you got Saul. You remember, he was taller than anybody else in the Israel. So that's our guy. You know, don't make that mistake twice. That is not, God's not looking like that. Even David now, when it gives David his credit, it tells he was ruddy, but it tells he was handsome. I think David was a handsome guy. But that wasn't what qualified him to be the king. And so you had Eliab, and then you had Abinadab, and then you had Shema, and I don't know what happened to the rest of them. They didn't give their names, but the bottom line is one right after another, after another, after another, after another, till all 7 sons have been looked at, and not one of them. I'm sure Samuel was going, okay, Lord, is this him? No. Is this him? No. But the key there is that Samuel was depending on God to say which one is and which one isn't. Not this. Again, if you want to check all the boxes, you can go back to Jonathan. And so many times, that's what we do. And I'm not saying it can't be part of the equation, but the final thing is this: God, is that your king? God, is that your pastor that you are choosing for us and want us to have? And so all of that is rejected. And then I want you to see this, the attitude is rejected, because Samuel says, okay, Jesse, is there another one? And Jesse's not showing much encouragement. He said, well, there is one. He's the youngest, but he's busy. He's busy. And Samuel says, well, get him unbusy. We're not going to do anything until we see him. 2 things to me that this says to a church looking for a pastor. Patience. It's and persistence. You know, this is what God told us to do. Look at the sons of Jesse. We hadn't seen all the sons of Jesse, and so we're going to see them before we do anything else. One of my pastor friends retired, I think it was in May. I went to his retirement. Great church, great opportunity for somebody. Great opportunity. Running over 300 right now, and maybe 350 in worship. Just a lot of excitement in the church. I preached up there a while back. It's just, well, somebody's going to get a great church. But you know what somebody told me the other day? He said, well, the church is getting really frustrated with the committee. And I'm like, he just retired in May. What do they think you do? You go outside and preachers are hanging on trees, you know? It is a patient, tedious, prayerful process. here, when you find yourself going, well, I just wonder what they're doing. You know what that ought to remind you of? I need to pray more for them. We need to lift them up. Because here's the deal. Just like you had David, that was God's choice, and he's about to put Samuel and David together, y'all's next pastor is out there. Now, I'm telling you right now, he may not even know that. He may be just as happy as... I used to have churches call me and say, well, Brother Gary, we'd like to talk to you about being our pastor. I said, well, I'm not looking for a place to go. They said, well, we're not looking for anybody that is looking for a place to go. I've probably had 5 churches around this area at one point or another call. You know, I never said from the start, no. I'd say, if you'd give me a couple of weeks to pray about it, I won't keep... Will you go ahead and send us a resume? No, I'm not going to send you a resume. I'll pray about it a couple of weeks. Then if I feel like I'm supposed to, I'll send you a resume. And after a couple of weeks, I would know that God, hey, He wasn't done with me. I was where I was supposed to be. 35 years, and I didn't want to leave when I did. I wasn't pushed out. I asked Dr. Jerry Vines one time. Jerry would be with me once a year. He pastored First Baptist Jacksonville, Florida, that huge church, former Southern Baptist Convention president. Every August, Jerry would be with me. So he had retired from the church, was living in Atlanta. That's how I could get him once a year. And so one day I said, Jerry, how did you know when it was time to retire? And he said, well, Brother Gary, I just wanted him to say, why did he, instead of why don't he? And so I knew that at some point that might happen. And so that kind of helped me make up my mind as far as when the time to come. But what you're seeing is don't panic. Don't succumb to peer pressure. Even again, if you're listening to Jesse, I got a feeling that it just wasn't. He's busy. He's the least. Let's bring this other. I'm kind of reading between the lines here, but hey, wait a minute. Let's bring these other 7 back. Look at them again. Daniel didn't need to look at them again. God didn't say that was the one. And again, so many times in churches, you'll get people that'll start saying, "Well, here's what we need to do," or "Here's what we need to do," and you can take all of that into consideration, but it still comes down. You can't be pressured. You just, again, especially when maybe somebody's on staff or somebody. Do you realize how many times I had to do this? Now, not pastor, but I couldn't keep my staff. We were a growing church. So other churches, you got a student guy, he's reaching people. The big churches, they call me Nick Saban. I'm not an Alabama fan, but they would call me Nick Saban. Brother Gary, you can't keep your staff. Every year, poor old Nick, he'd have to redo it, because people wanted somebody that had been under Nick Saban. I mean, we see them out there right now, Lane Kiffin, Kirby Smart. They're on the news every week that were influenced by this phenomenon of a coach. I think greatest coach has ever been, and I'm not an Alabama fan. But the bottom line is that, that's the truth. And so, man, I'd have to do this. And my methodology, it doesn't work everywhere, but I'd been there long enough that the church embraced this and allowed it. I just tell the leadership, I said, look, if I got an answer for them, I'm going to hire them. If they mess up, it's my head on. And so, I would do that. I would interview. I would call pastors. I just turn over every rock I could, every way that I could, and I'd find that person. And once I found them, then that's when I would present them to the personnel committee. And the personnel committee could interview them, and then they would be the one that would have the recommendation to the church. But even that process, so many times you're talking to somebody, and I was looking for a student pastor, and I had a young guy going into ministry, was at a Mississippi college. He's about his first or second year there, so I called him. I said, "Hey, man, I said, is he a sharp young student guy coming out wanting to go to Sanford? He went, Brother Gary, one of my best friends. I said, exactly. He wants to go to Beeson Divinity School. He's finishing up his undergrad. He's going to Beeson Divinity School. He said, I said, well, you know, he can be on staff here full time. I'll give him a day a week to go to the Beeson Divinity School or whatever we need to do. He said, oh man, I'll get you his name. So I'm thinking, okay, here we go. We're off to the races, you know. So I called the guy. We brought him up here from Mississippi. We put him in a motel. We, for 2 or 3 days, rode him around and interviewed him and got him before the right people. And you know, and I'm telling you, this guy shined like a new penny. Here's my guy. Here's my guy. Here's my guy. He calls me on Monday morning when he gets back, and he said, Brother Gary, I just think there's more work there than I'm willing to do. You know what I said? Thank you, Jesus. Thank you. And so I'm just telling you, that's a little bit of what your committee may go through. They may be, and nobody's going to be more disappointed than them when that happens, but it's all a part of the process. So try to understand that and pray for them and be with them. Well, last of all, an unreal acknowledgement as he sees David, this, again, at this, we know that when he tried to, in chapter 17, when he's gone face Goliath, Saul gives him his armor and it swallows him whole. So that tells you a little bit about David's stature, David's size, probably David's age at this time. I just think he was just a young teenager at this point. You know what? Not only that, but he's got these brothers. They're thinking, really? Him? Do you remember what happened when he was going to face Goliath? They get in his face. Who do you think? You just here to nose around. You don't have any business here. You know what? I heard of my good friend Dr. Willie Rice say this about that text one day. He said, do you know why most people never slay their giants? Because they get defeated by their midgets. David could have got so discouraged right there to just said, I ain't going to do it. I mean, we've all been there. You just sometimes, church people, church things. I've done it. I've quit 1,000 times. You know, Lord. But again, I'm a better pastor today for going through that stuff. And again, I can help somebody so many times that if I hadn't went through that, you know. And so David here, we see his youth, and then we see his approval. Turn to Psalm 78, verses 70 through 72. I want you to see this. Psalm 78, verse 70. Look what it says. He chose David, also his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds. From following the ewes, great with young, he brought him to feed Jacob his people, and Israel his inheritance. So he fed them, look at this, so he fed them according to the integrity of heart, and he guided them by the skillfulness of his hands. You know what seminary God sent David to? The shepherd. Remember, he did Moses that way. 40 years in the desert at Midian, equipping him to go back to do what he wanted him to do. But what a great testimony of David, how he led them, he learned that, and he used those principles that he learned shepherding the sheep to be the greatest king that Israel ever had. I'm so thankful that when God, I did student ministry for 17 years. I was like 38 years old, and I was on staff at Greenbrier Road Baptist Church with Dr. Knight there. And I knew that God was calling me out of student ministry to pastoral ministry, and I didn't know where in the world we just surrendered. My wife, my kids, I talked to them, and they were on board with it. And God called my whole family. But right in the midst of that, I had 2 or 3 churches, and here's what they would say: we won't consider anybody that had never pastored before. I remember thinking, how are you supposed to get experience? There's a church not far from Mount Zion that I sent my resume to, and somebody told me, said, it went straight across the desk and into the trash can. In my 35 years, they probably had 12 pastors. I'm telling you, they went through them like clockwork. But what happened was, I had been on staff at First Baptist Yarmouthville. My best friend was chairman of the pulpit committee. I'd had a great ministry there. They called and said, hey, we're looking for a pastor. Will you give us your resume? I'm like, oh my word. I just lived right there, right on the hill over there. I'm like, look, my kids are going to stay at Oxford High School and Oxford Elementary School. I ain't got to move out of my house. My best friend's the pulpit committee. Oh my, God is good. I'm telling you, I went out there that night, and it was like I didn't know them. They didn't know me. I had learned some things at Greenbrier, personal evangelism, and celebrative worship, and expository preaching. That was the 3 things that I had my toolkit, and I couldn't wait to go somewhere to put it to work. One of them even looked at me that night and said, do you think we want to be Greenbrier Road? I didn't say anything about Greenbrier Road. But you know what? I knew. When I got home that night, my wife said, how'd it go? I said, it went bad. I said, that ain't going to happen. I said, matter of fact, I just looked at him at some point and I said, look, if I go to the doctor and he tells me I'm dying, I get on the edge of my seat and say, is there anything I can do about it? I said, this church is dying, and y'all want a guy you can tell what to do instead of finding God's leader. And I knew then that was the death knell if I had a glimmer of hope. But I knew it. And then when I met with Mount Zion, it was totally, now you understand, that was a fraction of a size church. Sunday before I came, there were 62 in Sunday school, 26 in discipleship. I told you last Sunday, $450 offering. But I knew, and the committee knew. And that's my point. In this process, I think it still works where God says, there he is. And that's where Meadowbrook, you pray as hard as you can and as much as you can. God, show the guy, like I said, right now he may not even know it. And show the committee and put their hearts together. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the Bible study. Thank you for this time together. Thank you for Meadowbrook Baptist Church, the influence that it has been in this community and continues to be. Father, the influence it has been in my life through the years. People in this room right here that have invested in me. And Father, I'm thankful for it. Again, we love you. We'll give you the glory for everything in Jesus' name.